go. I'm going to start hearing my voice now in 3 different places. Okay, good. All right, we are live. Very, very good. We are definitely live. We are extremely live. Welcome, everyone. This is Meetup number 59, all right, the Data on Kubernetes community. I'm very happy to be joined by someone who I met quite a while ago in terms of Data on Kubernetes history, if we're thinking about that. And his name is Benoit, but goes by Ben. Yep. I'm not even going to attempt to say your last name because that gets very embarrassing when Americans try to speak Dutch.
No worries.
So I'm not going to embarrass you. Welcome, Benoit. It's very nice to have you with us. Tell us just a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you're going to be talking about today.
I'm going to talk about SRE. I am from actually the Netherlands. I love open source. I love being an SRE because it takes me all over the place to the organization. I am actually half French, hence the first name that is French and the last name that is Dutch. So for me, the problem is that in the Netherlands, nobody can speak my first name because it's French. And in France, nobody can speak my last name because it's Dutch. So that's always great. Thank you, parents. And I'm going to talk about...
How do you, really quickly though, how do you pronounce your surname? How do you say your last name?
My last name is Schipper.
Yeah, I'm not going to try.
It's basically the English word skipper.
But with a little Dutch twist there in the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And the thing is, I'm even trying to think about, I should have done my homework before we got here, but about when we started talking, did I contact you on LinkedIn, I think? Maybe it was, I think it was late last year.
LinkedIn, yeah.
And you're like, who is this crazy guy? But here we are.
Who is this crazy guy with the horn?
Yeah, with the horn. Anyway, Ben is a great community member, active in our Slack, helping folks out, sharing resources, answering questions, exactly what we're looking for in the Data on Kubernetes community. Just a reminder, if you're new, if this is your first meetup, we have a lot of meetups planned. We have a lot of stuff going on in Slack. You can check us out on Twitter, on LinkedIn. If you would like to give a talk, we're going to be doing a talk next week with the CNCF students group. Very excited about doing introductory sessions to, we did an introductory session about Docker last month. We'll be doing one next week about an introduction to Kubernetes. So it's kind of extending that knowledge out because we want people with lots of different backgrounds and experience. And speaking of experience, you mentioned previously that you were a networking engineer, but how did you get started in all this world of ops, networking, and then into SRE?
Wow, I actually started at a call center myself. I was a support engineer for Western Digital, actually. After a few months, I got into like more of a managerial role where I was dealing with like the difficult technical problems, because before that I was like hobbying with computers all around, throughout my youth. And afterwards, I was like, I have to study something because it's important. So I studied business IT and management, and while studying that, I actually got into the IT department, and then eventually became network engineer in that same company when I graduated as well. I got my bachelor, and then afterwards I was like, okay, I'm a network engineer doing this for 3 years now. And then I looked around, it's like, all right, I've pretty much done like most of the stuff. I'm not going to learn that much anymore. And then I was looking around, and then actually the company I work for now, HCS, contacted me and I was like, you want to work for us? We do cool stuff with Linux, open source, OpenShift, whatever, Kubernetes. Like, yeah, sure. I've never done anything like that, but sure, if you think I'm a good fit, then let's go. And from that point on, I know I just got like Reddit exams, and I did my certifications, and I started working for a company, and like the SRE role clicked straight away. It kind of fit with my technical background plus my business IT and management bachelor, and together it's a perfect combination to become an SRE. So that's where I'm now.
With that in mind, because we were talking about this, it does feel like in the last, 6 months, definitely a year, that this term SRE is becoming more common. Previously, we can say maybe hearing a lot about DevOps. Some of the DevOps folks might feel threatened about the arrival of SRE. When you first heard, do you remember when you first heard about SRE, or who you heard it from and how you imagined it? Or like you said, because your background, it did fit quite well. But what was it like when you first heard about it?
I actually heard about it quite a while ago, because it exists quite a long time already, like from Google's perspective, at least. And I've always, like, when I started in IT, I've always aspired to like, oh, well, wow, it would be really cool to be an SRE, but never really thought in my mind that I would actually get to the point that I'm becoming an SRE myself. So it might be that something all the way like 10 years ago in my head clicked and subconsciously got me to become an SRE. So yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. With that in mind as well, too, just really quickly, because we were talking about this previously, differences in your mind, and because I think this maybe gets a little bit challenging too sometimes, and we'll look at this a little bit more in detail, but because of the fact that it came from Google, the same way of like, Kubernetes comes from Google, or, coming from Borg originally, is SRE only a Google thing? Google is a very unique company with a very unique internal tech stack. Obviously the folks that work there as well too are going to have an influence on it. Does SRE change depending on the organization? Do you think it will be codified in the same way that DevOps has been? What do you think about that?
I don't think. Well, first of all, I would say that SRE is definitely a thing of like not only Google. Like it can definitely work out in many different companies, even companies that don't even do anything with Kubernetes or anything like that. That still work like in data centers or with VMs. I mean, you have the many different aspects of site reliability engineering that would fit in traditional organizations. I mean, the whole observability thing, you can apply that to bare metal installations, as long as you get more insights and prevent more outages. That's already something that SREs focus on. So it shouldn't have the stigma of only being applicable for like these cool organizations like Amazon or Google or anything like that, like the big corporations across the world. It definitely has a place in the multitude or variety of companies, and I hope to change that actually.
With that in mind, I think that's, like you said, is it really just a static thing? And we'll look at this a little bit later on as well about how this gets applied in the Netherlands, as well as some other wonderful things, wonderful lessons that we can all learn from the Netherlands, culturally speaking, about how to be more honest with ourselves and also with each other. But with that in mind, explaining SRE to a company, how does that work? And normally, who are the stakeholders that are involved in those conversations?
Wow, that's a big question. I would say explaining SRE, geez. A lot of the companies, they actually search for like DevOps engineers, but there are companies, the one where I'm working now, that actually searches for SREs. But a lot of the times I see that companies like list the whole IT department when they try to get an SRE. And they always focus on the hard skills, like the technical skills, but they barely focus on the soft skills. It could be that it's because they first want to check if you have the hard skills, then get an interview and see if you have the soft skills. But even when I've had interviews, they still focus on the hard skills. But this last employer the employer that I'm working for now actually asked me in an interview, if there's a problem, are you going to fix it, or are you going to wait till it's fixed? And they were looking for the mindset of, I'm going to fix it no matter the cost, right? You're going to go through the whole organization, even if you have to talk to 200 people to go and fix it. And they were looking for that mindset. That's a part of site reliability engineering that's important. So
that's good. That's good. I think also as well too is that with that in mind, thinking about problems, and I got to know this firsthand because in the past of working with IT, infrastructure folks, DevOps folks, and it seemed like 110% of their job was just dealing with problems and stuff breaking and fires in production and all this kind of stuff. So with that in mind, there does have to be an understanding that I will be dealing with problems on a regular basis. Sometimes calling them firefighters, all these different kinds of terms would be used. And it's interesting though that you mentioned the factor, the important point of mindset. In your academic career, was this mindset something that you learned in university? It's something that you developed over time. It's something that you have uniquely. What would you say?
It could be slightly cultural, because in the Netherlands we do have this efficiency mindset. Everything has to be as efficient as possible. We also are allowed in the Netherlands to say what we think. So it definitely makes a difference to get to the point and say what you think quickly, rather than not saying what you think and let it escalate. But I'm not going to say it's like something that I only have or developed. It's just something that I'm like. Even if I would work at a grocery store, I would try to do it to the best of my abilities. I just was brought up that way. I guess my mother worked in a hospital. My dad was a policeman, So I kind of got this like service natively when I was born, basically, as a service.
But that's interesting because, if you look at the books about, 97 things that every SRE must have or things like that, and I haven't read that, and maybe you have, but I think that as much as we can talk about the hard skills, we can definitely talk about soft skills and talking about company culture, talking about these things related to mindset. These are recurring themes and topics that we have very often in the Data on Kubernetes community, because while we are talking about technologies, there has to be the right mindset. And very often as well, too, talking about a beginner's mind, something you mentioned as well, too, is that, you go into a company and they might be like, well, you're the expert, you're the SRE, so you're going to have answers for everything. Is that the case? Do you have answers for everything?
No, I don't have the answer for everything, but I might have the best ability or the best way to think where the problem might be and then get to the solution as fast as possible. That's why it's so important to know the big picture and the organization. You have to know the processes, you have to know that surround your application, you have to know the technical part of the application, and you have to know the surroundings of the application. Like if there's a problem outside your application, I still want to know that it's there so that if there's a problem, I can say, this looks kind of like there's a database problem, for example, or this looks kind of like there's a network problem, for example. I mean, that's why it's so important to not just only look and focus on your own application, but look through the big picture, like zoom out all the way throughout your company, your main processes, anything that could help you to tackle or to find the problem as soon as possible and then solve it. And that's more like, of course, the firefighting standpoint, but you can also work on that proactively. So yeah.
No, I think it's a good way of putting it. And also what we had said before we started the meetup is that it's interesting that, the higher up you go in tech, the more often that maybe you might feel pressure that you do have to have an answer, and that's saying, I don't know. But like you said, is that, you're not paying me to have an answer for everything. You're paying me to be a proactive person who has the necessary skills to be able to find, diagnose, and also be able to keep a cool head while it's going on.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to say no, right? If you don't know something, like you can always say, I don't know yet, right? Like you don't have to have the answer for everything. It's just more important to find out what the problem is than to say, yes, I know it, and then afterwards you're struggling to find the problem, because that's just giving false expectations.
Absolutely. And that's, in my particular case, being the leader of a technological community that's very much focused on technologies that are very, very new, and a lot of things that I personally don't understand, having not, had hands-on experience of, I think just being as transparent and upfront about those things as possible, it's much, much better so that you don't end up creating those kind of expectations.
Exactly.
Now, to make sure that we get to some of the stuff that you wanted to focus on, this first question, just a reminder to everyone in the audience, if you have questions, comments, please feel free to put them in the YouTube comment section. And if not, we can always continue the conversation later on today, this week, next week in Slack. So first question that Ben mentioned, though, is that do you believe that technical application management will replace SRE in the long term? Perhaps maybe can we just get a definition of technical application management?
I'll get to it more in detail in the presentation. But okay. Technical application management, I would see as a predecessor to SRE. Okay. I would call it that, but I'll get more into it during the.
Okay. So let's jump into the presentation then. Jump into the presentation. Sure. Yeah, let's go for that. But once again, just as a reminder, ask questions. Ben, I don't know if you want to answer questions on the spot or if you prefer to wait until after the presentation, whatever you want to do.
It's not going to be like an hour-long presentation, so it should be like 10 minutes. So probably
easy
better
to get back to. Yeah, so we'll just save the questions for afterwards. Perfect.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to start then. Welcome all. Thanks again for having me, DoK and Bart. Today I'm going to talk about SRE, but not exactly what is SRE, but more to consider when implementing it. So. A little bit about me, a little bit more about me, because I've already talked a little bit about me. My name's Benoit Schipper, but you can call me Ben. Here's a bit of a word cloud of stuff that I like. I work as an SRE as an SRE consultant for HCS company. I love automation. I work a lot with Kubernetes or OpenShift, either in a data center or in the cloud. Off duty, I love sailing, playing RPGs for a long time already, and traveling all over the place. So let's get like.
Did you say RPGs?
Yeah, role-playing games.
Ah, okay. Not rocket propelled grenades.
Not
All right,
rocket
okay.
propelling grenades. No. That's a whole different game.
Sorry, I
You
guess
can,
it's just being very American. I apologize. Yeah.
So, site reliability engineering. So, most of us have already heard about site reliability engineering, or SRE in short. I mean, many books have been written, but for those who have not, SREs typically surround themselves with availability, latency, performance or efficiency, up to change management, monitoring, even emergency response and capacity planning. And usually they do this for an application or a stack of applications. SRE supplies the bridge between development and operations. I mean, for me, they make IT happen. As you can see in the picture, you have the people, dev and ops, pointing to each other, and the SRE is the like the red person in the middle that makes them join hands and make sure that the application runs. So SREs not only play a vital role in keeping the application reliable, but also in properly bringing new versions to production, especially when it comes to developing good, reliable solutions. They find themselves all over the place. So in fact, they're a kind of like enabler or guardian of the non-functional quality characteristics of software or systems. I mean, they even have their own ISO norm. It's 25010 if you're bored. However, with the adoption comes a question. How do you adopt SRE within the organization? And can you do it the same way in every country? I mean, let us take a look at my home country, the country of Python and Wi-Fi, Netherlands, because the Netherlands is a bit different and not in the way you might be familiar with. So in the Netherlands, we have a position in between dev and ops called technical application management. In Dutch, we call it TAB. This position was created back in the day when ITIL reigned supreme in operations management. So let me break down the traditional Dutch IT operations setup. There are guys who are developing and maintaining the application, and there are guys who are providing the infrastructure and maintaining this. But then who is bringing the next version of the application to production and keeping it alive on a daily basis? Well, those are the silent heroes of the organization. This is what we call technical application management, or TAB in Dutch. Also, ops is usually reserved for infrastructure, but applications use a more generic applications use more than one generic IT facility, such as one of them is middleware, for example. Middleware is a bit stuck in between dev and ops as well, but for this talk, I'm going to focus on the application side of technical application management. But if you'd like to know more, let's have another talk, Bart. So, if our technical application management, or in Dutch TAB, already supplies the bridge between development and operations, then do we even need SRE? We already have something in place. I mean, I believe as an SRE, there should be a place for SRE within Dutch organizations, but if you look at it, at first glance, they look very similar, but there are some key differences. The SRE placement within the organization differs in a way that there's more placement towards the development side of things as opposed to the infrastructure side. There's also a tech skill difference. Coding something completely different than typing something into the CLI. Yeah, you go more from like a CLI bashing to everything as a code. Also culturally, an SRE typically more inclined to work cross-team or cross-department, unburdened by like the typical ITIL processes. So more from a siloed way of working to a more synergetic way of working, with a healthy dose of DevOps best practices, of course. On top of all of this, their service orientation differs also. Traditionally from a more reactive way to a more proactive way. So preventing problems instead of just solving them. So from there, and from all of this, we can conclude that there is a difference in both hard and technical skills, soft skills and attitude for an SRE and a TAB. So let's get real. I believe in the next step in the evolution of technical application management, or TAB in Dutch, as sort of a technical application management 2.0, stuck in the middle between the business and ops, between development and the end user, a true next level IT warrior. I believe the SRE was born at Google within the US due to the need for something that in the Netherlands was partly covered by technical application management. So yes, we do need it. We need it everywhere. But the implementation vastly differs throughout the world. Positions such as technical technical application management in the Netherlands might be an advantage, but it could just be just be a disadvantage. I mean, implementing something new might be much easier than changing something that is already in place. So that actually concludes my presentation. Just to give you a small insight on how to look at an implementation regarding SRE and how it might work in the Netherlands. So thanks, Bart.
Fantastic. I was just writing in the chat. I want to know, Benoit, when is your book coming out and when will you be giving a TED Talk? You're super good. This is super, super good. And as you said, we will have to do another meetup because I think there's tons of different things that we can look at. This was a really, really nice summary. And also as well too, particularly because being someone from the United States and under, like you said, there's the technological context, there's a cultural context, there's the business context that's going to affect that. I feel like in some ways, because of the pandemic, we've become a more global society, or I would think that we should be, and also that we should be employing empathy more often, seeing how many different countries are being very affected by a similar problem. So hopefully that can permeate some of these other areas as well. Can I get you to stop sharing your screen just so that we can both be featured? Now, so you mentioned this. And I'm just curious as well, because it seems like often in the Netherlands that so the B in TAB, how do you say that in Dutch?
It's a beheer, so it's a technisch applicatiebeheer in Dutch.
Okay, so beheer means management then?
Kind of, yeah.
Incredible translation.
It actually would translate perfectly to. It actually would translate perfectly. It actually would translate perfectly to operations, but then it would be confusing. So I use the words management because you're kind of managing the application.
Okay. So it's a slightly different touch than we can say than just going directly for management. All right.
Yeah.
Now, so going back to the question. All right. Do you imagine that one will overtake the other? That technical application management will replace SRE in the long term in terms of how it's framed, the issues that it addresses, the problems that it responds to?
I think it might, but it's going to take a while. I mean, there in Netherlands, there's so many traditional organizations that have this technical account management set up, and I'm talking mostly also about government, and they don't. I would say they don't really want to go and change all those processes. I mean, going through several companies now and trying to implement the more DevOps type of working has already proved challenging because some people are more inclined to just work within their silo. They just want to, for example, like a developer might just want to develop, or something that does infrastructure just want to do infrastructure. They don't necessarily want to just go ahead and be responsible together for the application, or to have it up and running. A lot of the times what I see and what I think is problematic in organizations is that that a developer, for example, releases software and then just goes home, and the person who gets called is somebody from infrastructure or somebody from technical application management. And that should stop. I mean, we should put the responsibility with the people who create the software, for example. And that's basically the DevOps best practice, right?
That's good. And with that in mind too, is because we just got a question about this in the chat. When we talk about silos, we've had folks coming on here talking about chaos engineering. Actually had a really good one, Jürgen from Kepton, that was explaining about how, don't get chaos engineering just in production. You want to have it all the way back with CI/CD. And once again, then that it's not that you're just going to have, 4 or 5 people in an organization. They're going to be thinking about chaos engineering, but let's get this as shared as possible. But the question that we got here in the chat, which somebody's already answering, which is great. We have a very active audience. The question from Rax Romers is, can you explain where chaos engineering fits into SRE, or is it altogether separate?
I'm not going to say it's altogether separate, because it would definitely fit into like a CI/CD pipeline thing, and as part as automating it, it would definitely fit like in a niche way under SRE. The reason being is that, like you said before, Bart, I would prefer not to have just a department that focuses on chaos engineering. I would prefer, for example, an SRE or multiple SREs to work with a chaos engineering platform, providing that to the development teams, so they would be able to use that in their pipeline. So I'm gonna release my software. Okay, but before that, we're going to go through a pipeline that does the chaos engineering, and it's all prepared for me. The SRE stuff has already done everything for me. I just have to click and add it to my pipeline, and then the developer can use it. So it's basically chaos engineering as a service by SRE.
Very, very good. Follow-up question to that is from Ivan asking, would it be possible to set up some kind of comparison sheet to show the difference, the pros and cons, old and new, between SRE and TAP?
Yeah, that's definitely something. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm working on more of like let's say a white paper with one of my esteemed colleagues. And I'm actually going to do that, but it's going to be in Dutch initially. So
I gotta say, Benoit is a very good reason to learn Dutch, because you have a lot of stuff in Dutch, which makes sense. It makes sense. But obviously my translation skills will be pretty useless, but I would be happy to share it once you have it in English or Dutch. We actually do have a subgroup in our Slack and Data on Kubernetes called Nedercube to have folks from the Netherlands be able to talk about this stuff. And anyway, that's all good. Now we got another question. Oh, and you're getting some support from your company. They love you very much. I can imagine why. So HCS, you made a very good choice hiring Ben. Now, next question from Mark Bruins. So what is the end? In the end, what is the business value of SRE according to you, Ben? What would you say?
Wow. The business value of SRE. Well, the end goal of an SRE is to automate itself away. So I would say that's definitely a benefit to the organization, instead of having like a multitude of like teams working on a part of the application or part of the application stack or infrastructure or anything like that. Automate it and then make sure you're able to reliably use it. And that would, it would definitely get rid of like the menial toil or any tasks that you don't really want to do every day. And so you can focus on actually providing or improving the application or improving infrastructure. Taking away those toil tasks is definitely a big task. Yeah, leave it at that moment.
No, that's good. That's good. But you imagine a future where you automate yourself out of your own job.
That would be cool. I can go somewhere else, because there's many IT companies that need SRE. So
and it's funny is that because that seems to be an interesting thing, and that's a sort of fearful element that comes in when we talk about Kubernetes, because people hear the word automation, then they assume I'm not going to have a job. But it seems like there's plenty of work out there. I mean, like, you only have to look and see how many open positions there are for DevOps, for infra engineers. Well,
the thing is, people shouldn't be afraid. If you get rid of all the toil, like all the menial tasks that you don't really want to do, but you're doing because you want to keep your job, you can use that time to create new insights. Like just focus, check your monitoring, check your logs, create new insights, and then find something to possibly improve the application even more. So it's like a win-win situation. I mean, work's never done. Let's just call it that.
There's always something else that can be. That's it. You can work 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and there's always going to be something else. With that in mind, and because like you said, avoiding focusing on these sort of menial toil tasks. Because one of the other things we want to talk about is what's the most difficult thing. HCS obviously works with a variety of different kinds of companies. What's the most difficult thing about implementing SRE when you get inside an organization? Because like you said, you need to have a lot of background information. And sometimes companies get really sensitive because they're like, it's not just that this is maybe it's one question being confidential, but sometimes things can be embarrassing about expenditures, about legacy code, about why things are organized the way they are. So you might find yourself in a pretty delicate situation sometimes with certain stakeholders. So like I said, what are some of the major challenges that you have when trying to implement SRE in an organization?
Major challenges are, I wouldn't say not necessarily implementing SRE, but definitely the DevOps best practices that come with it. So, for example, being able to see production information in production databases. That's one of those things that a lot of companies have like segmented the way so that only one person can check it or whatever, which is not very great if you're in a DevOps team, because the DevOps team's responsible for the application. Then if they get called during the night and they can't do anything because they can't see it, then how do you expect them to solve the problem, right? That's something that I actually get to talk about a lot through the organization. Like, you have to trust your people to use the data responsibly and how do you say that? Like you like I said, you can't expect somebody to solve something without seeing the information. That's just like a no-brainer. But I still see it a lot that they still don't want to do it. Like it takes a lot of persuasion to actually get that done. And I understand, like, you don't have to show all the data, but maybe there's other ways you can create a DevOps app or something that's only for your team that can do a certain menial task, like deleting something in a database. That's like a regular thing that happens. For example, if you have a problem in production and you didn't solve it straight away, then instead of getting everybody access to the database and deleting stuff, which not really preferable, yeah, you might want to just make like a subsection in your DevOps app where you would make this operation so that you just have to click and it's done. So yeah, it's difficult to get the implementation, especially when it comes to rights to seeing stuff within the organization. It's definitely delicate. In the Netherlands, I might get away with being Dutch because I kind of say what I think, but in other countries, I probably would have to be a bit more delicate.
That's true, and but I can see why that would make it challenging, as you're only trying to be transparent and give them information so they can make better decisions. But sometimes that information, depending on the culture, in terms of how you have to package things or whatever. But I understand that sometimes, like, look, what do you prefer? An extra dose of kindness, but perhaps losing some clarity, or total clarity and an answer that's more direct that might hurt your feelings a little bit. Yeah. That's tricky. Thinking about stakeholders, does SRE start, do we go from the top to the bottom? Is it generally starting with, C-level staff, or is it starting with developers, or you do both simultaneously? How does that work?
Wow. I think it's more of, because it's kind of related to DevOps as well with its best practices. I would say what I see happening, and that's only my experience, is that it's more of a bottom-up movement. The reason being is that, in my experience, a lot of the people that are from the top, like, let's say, architecture type of people that try and design the landscape, or enterprise architects, anything like that, they kind of clash with like the DevOps best practices and the way that SRE might want to do things. That's because they usually come from a more traditional standpoint. Let's just call it 20 years ago. And we developers or people from operations, and now DevOps and SREs, we try to get to it from a completely different angle. So there's really like a big kind of like a misfit between management and then the people that are actually doing the work. Let's call it that.
Yeah, I think that's good. But I think it's also, once again, when we're talking about change management, because that's a huge topic in all of this, is when is the management team ready for it? When are the developers kind of testing the maturity levels, and which is why I think there always needs to be a big period of dialogue and just getting a lot of questions out in the open.
What's difficult as well is that a lot of companies, they sort of start doing like a test. So like this one team is going to do DevOps, and then it gradually grows, usually through the organization, because it works, right? So people start adopting it from other teams. They say, "Oh, that team's doing cool stuff. I want to do that as well." And then it slowly grows. So that's kind of the reason why a lot of times I see a bottom-up movement. But it also gives challenges, because then if you start small and if you start only like with a certain department, then maybe another department, for example, like somebody like that does database management or something, is completely not used to the way that this development team's working. And if there is a disconnect for like 1 or 2 years, then it's definitely gonna grow exponentially in different ways. where a DevOps person might expect something like a service from the database team that the database team's not even like providing or can provide. And the way that a DevOps team are like responsible for their own stuff is also can also be a mismatch with other teams that might not work that way or have separate operations and separate development. So it can be very challenging to be in an organization starting out with DevOps. You're gonna hit a lot of brick walls.
Yeah. With that in mind, someone in the chat asked, is SRE the missing link for DevOps in parentheses in Dutch companies?
I would say that it's definitely like because we do have tab already, so technical application management. I definitely would say that it's an upgrade from the current state of technical application management. You could call it the missing link. Yeah, it could be. Yeah, I would say SRE is more of like the embodiment of DevOps best practices.
Okay. Further down, just a comment. Chat ops is a great way to implement DevOps functionality with guardrails and hand it off to developers at large. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do.
Good. Okay. It was tough, but you got it out. All right. So you do agree. All right. Very, very good. Now going back to some other questions that we got through Slack. If someone wants to get started out in SRE, if you're thinking about, career path and career progression, it just sometimes this might sound really silly, but how old does somebody need to be? Does it matter? Thinking about things like certifications, what kind of stuff would a junior SRE do? What do you think?
If a junior SRE would start in an organization, I would definitely get it to first of all know the culture of the organization he's in. The technical stack and read a lot of the documentation if there's any, right? Pair up with developers or people from infrastructure, get the ins and outs of the application functionality and its usage. Adjust outdated documentation. That's a lot of the times. I mean, even Google, I think, mentions that in their books. Fix or sideline with outages that might occur. So tag along when there is an outage so that you get to learn more ins and outs about the application. Think about what might improve the reliability or, for example, more observability or different monitoring. And I think the most important of all is claim your position. So stand strong. Even if you hit brick walls, just go right through them.
Wow. How many brick walls have you been through?
Many. I've thick skin by now.
Okay. Scars to tell the tale. All right. And so with that in mind, what would be an example of a brick wall without mentioning names or getting too specific?
Well, those traditional ITIL processes that I was talking about, like change management. Like if there was a certain application that was onboarded 20 years ago, change management still wants to have it done exactly the same way that it's been doing those past 20 years. If I do a little change, then it needs to go through like the cab and some board and whatever, and it takes 20 years for it to get done. Instead of just me going, let's just go and try it in development, test, and acceptance, for example, first. We could always just go back and say, oh, this is not working. We can change it again. No, we have to go through this whole process of like approval and whatever. It takes like 20 years. I mean, what is this book called again? The Phoenix Project. I mean, that's a good example, right? Mm-hmm. So if you haven't read that, by the way, you have to read it. So
everybody read the Phoenix Project. All right, get that right now.
Must thing for SREs.
Okay, that's good to know. We got a follow-up question from Mark. Seems a little bit on the comical side, but it says, so if we don't have tabs in our enterprise, we don't need SRE?
Oh, yes, you do. I mean, that's why Google initially actually thought of the SRE role, right? I mean, they had the gap between development and ops, and SRE kind of filled that gap, maybe in a different way that technical application management initially did that in Netherlands. But there's definitely a role if you don't have anything in between dev and ops for SREs in the organization. Definitely.
Yeah. With that in mind as well, one of the questions that we got previously from some folks in Slack was, does it strike you as interesting, when we talk about, talent gap and looking for these roles, and whether it's juniors or seniors or anything, that companies are having a really hard time, from what I can tell, to fill roles that are frequently related to infrastructure, DevOps, SRE. It's kind of curious that there are lots of, coding boot camps generally for, front end or full stack developers, but it doesn't seem that that's really the case when we think about infrastructure. How do you think that young professionals can get the necessary technical skills then in order to be able to work in these DevOps, SRE type positions?
Well, the best thing to get is experience, but that's easier said than done, obviously, because you need to get hired. You can always play around with a lot of open source things. Open source is free. A lot of times you can even install it on your Raspberry Pi, so it's not that it's expensive or anything. You should be able to just do it. And the reason why I think there's a lot of like development boot camps as opposed to maybe infrastructure type of boot camps or anything like that is that probably due to the shift of going towards DevOps, those developer boot camps might actually supply the demand for infrastructure people, because they're going towards more of a everything as a code. So
yeah,
you have to change that mindset from like typing something into CLI where you get input output towards conceptualizing something, making a program or an application or anything like that, to think ahead of time and say, oh, I want to have this output, instead of having the exact, instead of just typing something and then getting the output. So it's a complete different, conceptually a different way of thinking, and developing is definitely different than typing stuff in the CLI.
Very, very good points. Now, another question: how important are incident retrospectives for SREs?
Very important. SREs usually, from the Google book, you call them postmortems, right? Learning from failure is very important. Even outside work, right? Just if you don't do anything, you're not going to get any results. But if you try, even if you fail, at least you just learn something. A lot of the times what I see in postmortems and retrospective is that there's this blame game going on, and that's definitely not good. It definitely doesn't provide a healthy conversation towards retrospectives. And it should be a place where you can just say, okay, I failed. We've learned from this. This is the root cause. And this is what we're doing to prevent it from happening ever again, right? And by not only doing it within your team, but actually sharing it, preferably, or writing it down somewhere, allows other teams to actually read or get into the postmortem sessions as well, so they can also learn from it to prevent it from even ever happening for those people. So it's definitely very important in the SRE position and within the organization.
Very good. Speaking of organizations, like you said, there's got to be a strong view. There's got to be an understanding of the culture. What about understanding business? There's a constant debate that, the tech side doesn't pay enough attention to business side doesn't pay enough attention to tech. What was your business knowledge like prior to getting into this position? And how would you say it's grown? And any recommendations that you might make for people out there who need to learn about how their customers, companies are functioning?
When I got into this position, I didn't know anything about the organization. So I initially just had a bit of a back foot into development teams, just more and more listening to how they work, more and more listening to what problems they run into, writing those down from time to time to see if I could solve them or think of ways to improve the efficiency of it. And that's definitely took me probably 2 or 3 months to actually make some sort of a contribution that was valuable to the team. And from that point on, you also gain traction from your team. So that allows you to maybe, go together with a developer and say well, could you just maybe put this library into your application so I could get some more metrics out of it. And from there, you get more insights. And from more insights, you get more information. From more information, you get even more insights. And then you can say to the developer, well, that's bad. That's maybe a bad piece of code, or you could do this, or you could change it, or can you help me change this, because maybe you don't know how he actually made that. Or you have to start from somewhere. You have to get the confidence of your development teams, the development teams that you work with, and you have to get to know the stack. We'll leave it at that.
Okay, talking about getting to know the stack. You probably see, different kinds of technologies, advantages and disadvantages, specifically if we're talking about monitoring with using proprietary over open source.
I would say the advantage for open source monitoring is that it's highly customizable usually. You have the open source code, you can basically do whatever you want with it. And if you have any contributions to make, or if you've made any changes that actually put any value, you can give back. You can give back so that everybody could use it. Disadvantage, I would say, you have to do it yourself, so there might be a little bit more operational time because you have to, apply the open source solution yourself. You have to learn it. You might have to code a bit. You get less out of the box, I would say. Not always, because there's definitely many open source tools that give you actually a lot out of the box, and you might face some problems like integrating with existing solutions. If you, a lot of the times I see that with open source project, they're like basically made for the cloud where everything is new and everything fits. But if you want to use open source code within a more traditional organization, you might run into problems with integration.
Okay, very good. Now taking it more towards the data area, big conversations for us in our community. We're talking about storage. We're talking about stateful workloads, applications. We're talking about databases. And we're also talking about as well too, the transition from DBA to SRE. And now also as well, a new term that's, I would say, still not being very widely used, DBRE, database reliability engineer. What do you think about that? Where are things going in the future from what you can see right now?
As far as like for data integrity goes, I would say it's one of the most difficult things to monitor. I would say that we would have to do a talk about this or something, because that's a big topic.
And we will.
But I would distinguish maybe, let's just say, two types of where you could monitor your data integrity. And I'm going to go on the basic level. I'm not going to go in nitty gritty. You'd have like more like a black box type of monitoring, where you would monitor your data integrity surrounding your microservice or surrounding your application. But you'd also have maybe the other way would be to monitor the data within the application. So when the data arrives in the application, is it actually a valid information that the application should present to the end user? But that's a whole nother level where you'd have to like develop your own metrics and logs to be able to actually monitor that. So those would be two types of ways to do any monitoring or data integrity on Kubernetes at least. And the development for DBRE, I think it's good. I've had situations where I expected the DBA team to proactively monitor stuff, and that's not always been the case. So I would say definitely go ahead and let's make some DBREs.
Okay, good. So there is a future out there.
Yeah.
And there is a future out there. Another thing more Kubernetes specific, a lot of, talking about Kubernetes adoption, like the numbers look good, like all those kind of things. In your perspective, which is your favorite Kubernetes IDE?
I don't really have a favorite one. I've worked with the OpenShift UI and Rancher, played with similar Cloud K like Kubernetes IDEs, but I don't really have a preference. I'd like to try Lens. I haven't tried it yet, but I hear a lot of good stuff about that, and it's open source as well. I would say that as long as the IDE you're using, and not only you but your team, fits the knowledge level of the organization, then you're good to go. If the IDE helps you a lot, then it might be more suitable for people that are starting. But if it's more like a command line thing, or if it's more like the traditional way of like do more native stuff, KAS, then it would definitely be more for the more advanced companies, like let's call it the Googles and other companies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Taking away from things that are so advanced, if you have to explain, your job to, an elderly person or a very young person, and they come up to you and they say, Ben, what is this SRE thing? What is it that you do? In a couple sentences, how do you, in a simple way, explain that?
I would tell him that SREs make IT happen. I would tell him that somebody built something or developed something, but who makes it available and keeps it that way? That would be the SRE.
Okay. Well, so we can think of a sort of, yes, like you said, the thing that allows other things to happen.
Exactly.
So which is also what I realized, like I said in the past, of sitting with all the IT ops folks, systems admins, etc., is that it's a thankless job. Most of the time, it's just only focusing on the problems, or that this is broken, or this doesn't work, but not forgetting, that the vast majority of the time, we're the ones that are making IT happen, or you're the ones that are making IT happen, making these things function.
Yeah.
So that's a good way of putting it. Now, just to take this further, because you mentioned the RPG thing in the beginning, are there any no. How did you get into RPG, first of all? And second of all, are there any parallels that you can make between RPG things that you learned from that world that you've been able to apply to SRE? I imagine there have to be.
Oh,
there have to be dozens.
A lot. Yeah, let's talk about some. Communication, first of all. I mean, I played the well-known video game World of Warcraft, and back in the day, it was 40 people online trying to kill a certain boss. I'm not going to get into the details. But you'd had to communicate over like IRC or anything like that, because back in the day we didn't have Discord or anything cool like that. So we had to like these like very badly coded audio programs where we talk with each other. In the background, you'd hear people people's moms saying they have to stop playing video games or whatever. Like it would be like chaos because it was 40 people. Imagine trying to guide 40 people to do one thing.
Wow.
I mean, that's definitely difficult. And then leading those people to do those things, that's definitely something I enjoyed. I found it very challenging, but it's definitely got me communication skills. I mean, and patience. A lot of patience.
For sure. And 40 people that would be in the Netherlands or all over the world?
All over the world.
And everyone with their own version of English or lack thereof. So I think that's super, super cool. All right, what else? Other kinds of things that you learned from RPGs?
Well, English, obviously, like the English spoken language, but also preparing. So because when you go and play with 40 people, you have to say, we have to be online at 8 o'clock. And then we have the different time zones as well. We have to be prepared. So you have to get all your stuff ready. I'm not going to get into the details, but you have to get all your stuff ready. Make sure that you're available for those 3 hours, because 40 or 39, let's say 39 other people depend on you. If like 5 people say, well, I'm going to go in a smoke break, then then 5 other people are going to go and 10 other people are going to go. So you have to be kind of like let's just call it an assertive person.
Disciplined. Yeah. Assertive and disciplined. That's good.
Yeah.
But I think this is fascinating, because a lot of times people might think like, oh, how do my hobbies relate to your job? Well, of course they do. Like, and when, at a certain point, when does one become the other? But I think those are good things. I think also as well, like creativity, solutions, different things like that, in those kind of situations where you're faced with a problem and you have to really think outside the box. I imagine that will happen as well too in an SRE position. Because like you said, you may not have all the answers, but you're there as the person who's best equipped to be able to explore, to be able to communicate.
Like, another little thing, maybe that like, let's say that you're fighting the boss and half the people die, right? You still have to solve the problem of killing the boss. So you have to like, what is it? Troubleshoot, let's say, to try and still do it with half the people. So it's definitely another point. We could do a whole talk about video games and how it relates to IT. So.
Oh no, definitely. We'll have to talk about that later. But I think that's really good. Now, thinking about if there's one thing that you could have learned that you didn't know, from RPG or other things like that before you got started as an SRE, what would it be? Saying, it really would have been helpful if I had spent more time reading about this or learning about that. Of course, it can never be perfect, and you are where you are right now, and you're doing very well. But if there's something that you could go back and maybe relearn or learn more deeply, what would it be?
It would probably not be even something technical or something that I should have read. It would have probably been more like a life lesson thing, where I would say probably dealing with politics and the agenda of evil men, probably.
The agenda of evil men.
Yeah.
Men are evil. That we can agree on that. And they have agendas, which are also evil as extension. Yeah. The political thing is a really good point. And once again, is that in technical programs or things like that, I don't know, because I didn't study computer science, but I don't imagine that they have like, okay, let's have an office politics or company politics class. watch Game of Thrones, watch House of Cards, watch, something like get educated on things like that, because it's true. And it also affects technological decisions. When we're talking about, hey, why don't you try to put your databases on Kubernetes? But someone in an organization is like, no. I got 3 years until I'm retiring. I'm not taking that on. And so it really, a lot of times it's not that there's a better or worse technology, is there a better or worse match for the company at that time? As we said earlier, do you go from top to bottom to top, from C-level or developers? So learning about politics, you could maybe teach a course on politics then.
Well, I think it would be very interesting. I always wanted to do a master still because I've only done my bachelor. So, but I'm not gonna. If I would do a master, I would do something around the lines of probably business psychology or something like that, because that would aid me even more in trying to understand the organization and trying to understand what people actually want without them exactly saying it.
That's true, because everybody kind of know. Well, some people don't even know what they want. That gets complicated, or you need to help them and get to actually say that. But I think it's a really good point. And at the end of the day, it's a big exercise in empathy. Everyone arrives to a company at a different point in time, has different objectives, has different pain points, different good relationships that need to be improved. So there's definitely a lot of stuff there to be thought about. Good. Well, we are very, very good. Oh, you're getting a shout out in YouTube for the nice comparison between MMORPGs with real world scenarios. No, but I think that's the thing, is like a lot of people see that at face value and be like, oh, it's a bunch of nerds gaming. It's like, no, there's a lot more to that.
Let's just say that I can always tell my parents, you see, it still turned out well for me. I played a lot of video games and it turned out well.
Yeah, unfortunately, not everyone might be as capable as you have been to apply those skills. But I think it's important is that people just not see it as something. You can see it as like, oh, it's just a game, but you can also see it as something where there's much more going on there. You met people from different countries, you learned a language, the organizations of timing, needing to be prepared, that if you're in a tough situation where half your team dies, that you still have to defeat the boss. How are you going to do that? Learning to accept loss as well. Like you said, hitting the brick walls, there are tons of parallels there. So I think it's a really positive thing. Speaking of parallels and stuff that we like to do here, I'm going to share my screen because we're getting to the final part. It's funny is that you said you were nervous. I don't even know if I believe that, but because you're so calm and collected, as every good SRE should be. But we have a tradition in our community where while we are doing the meetup, we have our wonderful graphic recorder, Angel, who is recording. Let me know when you can see my screen. So I suppose you can see it. So while we've been talking, he's been creating this artistic depiction of all the stuff that you've been talking about, which of course isn't easy because you've touched on a lot of different things. Angel as well too. English is his third language. So he's doing all this with that sort of angle as well too. But anyway, it's always a nice way to sort of be able to show the stuff that we've been talking about with a sort of different twist. So we'll be sharing that on Slack and also on Twitter. But it's, like I said, just a nice way to sort of combine technology, talks, and art simultaneously. We are just about out of time, Ben. So is there anything else, any final messages, resources that you would recommend if folks want to learn more about SRE? I don't know if you have any go-to sort of blogs or places that you like to go.
Definitely read Phoenix Project. There's another new book that's specifically focused on SRE from the same writer, which is called The Unicorn Project. Check that out as well. Read the Google SRE book if you can. I know it's a big fat book and it's a lot of technical mumbo jumbo, but you just want to read it because there's always good things about good things that you can learn from it. And definitely just keep going. Don't let any brick walls hit you in the face and make them stop you. Just keep going. Keep going and solve those problems.
Keep going and solve those problems. Don't get down on yourself. Like you said, you're going to encounter obstacles. We all do. Don't take it personally. It's not a big deal. You have a lot of fans out here. So I'm going to, like I said, we are just about done, but I can tell why. Very nice to have you once again. If you want to hang out with people like Ben, get in our Slack, ask questions. As you can see, it's very, very down to earth, as I would say most of the people are that are in our community. If they aren't, you can inform me and I will happily talk to them and something we can work on together. But anyway, this is exactly what we're going for. We're here to share knowledge. We're not here to say we're better than anybody. We can always be a little bit more Dutch and be honest with ourselves and honest with each other. So that's a good lesson. Ben, I hope to see you in the Netherlands this year, if not next year.
Sure, let's meet up. You're
Got
welcome.
a lot of really, really cool people out in the Netherlands. I'm a big fan of the Netherlands. So that being said, thank you all very much. It was a great meetup, one of my favorites. I don't say that in every meetup, by the way. This definitely was one of my favorites. So we'll be seeing everybody in Slack. We'll share the recording as soon as we're done. Ben, thank you very much, and we'll definitely